Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Kermit Whitfield, a member of the CMC Board of Trustees and Director of Communications at United Way of Central Ohio. Welcome to a special bonus edition of the CMC Forum. We thought having an exclusive edition was very fitting given our guests joining us today from Ohio's greatest home newspaper. Today, CMC is honored to welcome the new leaders of the Columbus Dispatch. For a century, the Dispatch was a family-owned newspaper, but that all changed a few months ago. And today we will learn more about the ramifications of this change and how this venerable local institution is positioning itself for the future. Please welcome Interim Publisher of the Columbus Dispatch, Jim Hopson, Editor of the Columbus Dispatch, Alan Miller, and News Programming Director for 89.7 NPR, WOSU Public Media, Mike Thompson. Jim and Alan will each provide a short introduction, and then Mike will take over for our interview portion. Please welcome all of our speakers. Jim, the podium is yours.
Thank you, Kermit. Alan and I are here to talk about what's happening at the Columbus Dispatch. As you might remember, the Dispatch changed hands in mid-June, and things have been pretty quiet there ever since. Until last week. Last week we announced a layoff. And you might be wondering whether that layoff is a preview of other changes to come and whether there is a fundamental change in the direction of the Dispatch. To address that, I'll talk about the business. Alan will talk about his newsroom, and we'll answer your questions. The Wolf family has owned the Dispatch for more than 100 years. And during that long period of stewardship, the Dispatch became an important and influential part of life and commerce in Central Ohio. But in recent years, the media business has changed a lot. I'll quote John Wolf, the longtime publisher of the Dispatch. "The past 2 decades of accelerating and challenging change in the newspaper industry made it clear to us that maintaining a single city, family-owned newspaper in this environment was untenable long term." So they sold the business. Specifically, they sold the Dispatch, a weekly newspaper group that publishes 25 suburban weekly newspapers, a magazine division that publishes Columbus Monthly and Columbus CEO, a big direct distribution company, and Dispatch Digital. The buyer was the New Media Investment Group. That's a publicly traded holding company that operates Gatehouse Media. Gatehouse has only been in existence for a short time, but in just a few years, it has acquired enough newspapers that it is now the biggest publisher in the United States. It owns more daily newspapers than any other. As you can imagine, when the Wolves quietly put the print business on the market earlier this year, there was a great deal of interest in buying it. First of all, and I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, the Central Ohio market is just a great market to be in business in. And the Wolf family, over the years, had assembled what I consider to be the finest collection of publishing assets under one roof that I've ever seen in more than 40 years in the newspaper business. The only real problem was that the businesses spent too much money, primarily on payroll. So for the last 3 months, I've been working with the leadership at the Dispatch and some people from Gatehouse to figure out how to make the company a leaner and more nimble business without in any way diminishing its capacity to provide great journalism and excellent customer service. Last week's reduction in force was one of a number of initiatives that will roll out over the next year or so. So certain things will be paced by the availability of technology. Certain things just take a while to figure out, but there will be a number of additional organizational changes over the next year. But when it's done, the company will be stable and prosperous for a long time to come. And that's very much in the interest of the people in this room and the people in this community, because the Dispatch is an important and influential institution. Its stability and longevity is something that means something to this community. And so the more we can make this a good, solid business, the better off everybody is. Luckily, the quality of the people that I found in the dispatch organization has been uniformly excellent. When the Wolf family sold the print business, they took with them most of the senior management of the company. So we had to restock. We've been able, through internal promotions, to put a terrific leadership team in place. You've met Alan Miller, who's the new editor. We have a new vice president of sales, a new controller, a new marketing director, a marketing VP. And I was able to get Ray Paprocki back to run the magazines. So you remember Ray. I mean, that's good. Well, Ray was just a great editor at Columbus Monthly for a long time. He got hired away to run a group of magazines down in Florida. He demonstrated that in addition to being a great editor, he was a terrific businessman as well, and he was just the perfect guy to bring back here to run the magazines. Now, the last change to the management team will be the publisher. I'm the temporary publisher. And as it gets colder here in Columbus, I look with increasing ardor at my house in Florida and plan to be here no more than about another month. A new publisher's on the way. Because Gatehouse is a big company, the Dispatch will benefit because it can buy things like paper and ink and insurance more cheaply, because Gatehouse can provide certain services and expertise for which the Dispatch would have to pay otherwise. John Wolfe was exactly right when he said that his family's company would be a stronger and financially more successful business as part of a bigger enterprise. That is already happening. Here are some other examples of the benefits that the new ownership brings to Columbus. Gatehouse has hired the world's best and certainly the most expensive media designer to design new websites and mobile sites for all of its newspapers. What that means for you is that the website on which you read the Dispatch or the mobile app that you have on your phone will look better and work better. Alan is working with a team of editors from across Gatehouse to coordinate their coverage of the 2016 election season. So you'll see more and better political coverage next year as a consequence. And next month, we will be introducing to the Columbus market a best-in-class suite of digital advertising products and services that the business community will really benefit from. And I ought to mention that the Gatehouse people have been very impressed by the quality of the people and the innovative programs that they've seen here in Columbus. They've already started to borrow Dispatch ideas to deploy around the company, and they're starting to borrow Dispatch people for company task forces and that sort of thing.
Well, it's an honor to be here today. For those of you like Mike Loers who know me primarily by my Old House Handyman column, you're probably wondering, why is the Old House Handyman and now in charge of the newsroom? You may have read in the flyer at your table that I've been at the Dispatch longer than Greg Lashetka had been in, or before he entered politics. Dorothy Teeter, I think she was involved back then, but young in her career. So I've been around the Dispatch for 31 years, and yet there are many things that I didn't know about Dispatch readers until just a few weeks ago when I became the editor, and I can tell you that I have learned a great deal in a short time from Dispatch readers about what being the editor of the Dispatch means. You ask a lot of questions and you want answers immediately. One reader from Lancaster emails me almost every Sunday morning before I've gotten out of bed, and I get up pretty early. He's read the whole paper and he has questions. I've found that in casual conversation on the street, one of the first questions I get is, directly at the heart of our operation, and that is, what's going to happen to the neon sign on top of your building? If any of you are wondering, at this point, it will stay on top of 34 South 3rd, even as we move to 62 East Broad. Jim is working with the Wolf family for a reasonable lease to keep it on the roof until we have a building with a roof large enough to hold it. Some readers see signs of our new owners in just about every possible place. Here are some examples. It's clear that since the new ownership, the paper is more conservative. It's clear that since the new ownership, the paper is more liberal. Since the new owner has taken over, there have been several issues and decisions worthy of strong commentary, and instead we are subjected to a couple of juvenile lectures on the safety benefits of red light cameras. Next, wow, the editorials have been really strong since you got new owners, and the cartoons too. Ever since you got new owners, there have been more creases in the paper. I'm not kidding. Since you got new owners, the weather in Columbus has been a lot hotter. The next thing I've learned is that everything, and I mean everything, is my fault. A college buddy warned me that it would be this way, as was the case for Ben Marison before me. Those of us in the editor's chair are lightning rods for everything that has or will or could go wrong. Here's an example. The Life and Arts staff ran a review last month of the movie, The Diary of a Teenage Girl. It was on the Life cover under a, mundane headline that said, "Lust or Love?" ? Talk about a lightning rod. One reader clipped it out, sent it to me, and said, "You should be fired as editor for printing this page." A great example of my next point, and that is that you feel a very strong connection to the newspaper, a sense of ownership that I would wager is much unlike anything that you have with anything else that you consume. So from an editor's perspective, that's both gratifying because I really appreciate how much you care about what we do and how we do it. But it can be frustrating because you also feel the right and maybe even the obligation to tell me exactly how you feel about what we produce. So I have some examples. This one was left on voicemail. Who is the idiot who decided to move Click TV Guide from Sunday to Saturday? That person should be fired. There's a theme here. It's remarkable how quickly some people can go from zero to "you should be fired." So because this reader left a voicemail, I called her back and she answered the phone. I see, John Davidson, you can relate to that? Yeah. So I picked up the phone and I called her back. She answered and I said, "This is Alan Miller, editor of the Columbus Dispatch, also known as the idiot who decided to move Click from Sunday to Saturday." And she howled. I explained that the move, we made that move because the Sunday paper had gotten so big that it had grown beyond the press capacity to handle it on Sunday, so we needed to move it. She didn't like that, but she was appreciative that I called. Another example. Here's a quote. "Does the paper today reflect the priorities of you and your publisher? On the front page is Biden and Columbus, and the Iran agreement article is on page 4, and buried deeper in this is the story about the police union being against marijuana, section B, page 10. This was in an email I got on Sunday morning. Why make casual readers hunt for the important articles? This came from a fellow that goes to I didn't realize this till I got to church on Sunday morning. He comes up to me and he says, "Alan, I sent you this email. When you see it, could you just delete it? Because I probably shouldn't have said that." But I'm glad he did, because story placement it's often a point of contention, even in our newsroom. It's arguably subjective, and about what's most important. And we don't take that lightly. We do our best to pick well. I'm not saying that we always get it right, but we try hard. One factor that I found that readers don't always consider, that we take into consideration, and that is the ongoing coverage of a particular story. It might appear on the front page one day and not the next, because we see it as an incremental move forward. They also don't always consider the weight of the news of the day. So there are some times when other stories are just so big and important that they push off of the front page the stories that they think are most important. So one more example. In response to the pending job reductions that are coming for our copy desk and our art department in January, we're going to lose 20-some folks come January because the work that they do now is being moved to Austin, Texas. And I want to make clear that, well, I'll explain this in a minute. Here's the quote. "The Dispatch has done a masterful job of providing long-form journalism, wonderful stories that have exposed real issues here, and the people who are being let go had a key hand in those stories. We need that kind of reporting and the important artwork and graphics that support these stories. We need the reporters to support and the support staff to continue to dig deep into key issues that impact our lives. Without that, we lose the objective oversight of our government and businesses." We're on the same page with that, reader. We want to ensure that the news gathering team remains strong. We're losing one reporter to voluntary severance and no others. We'll still have copy editors here in Columbus to handle the copy that is produced by our reporters here. And the things that can be done elsewhere are being moved elsewhere because it will reduce costs and allow us to preserve the core of our newsroom. One other thing that readers want to know is how will the news and editorial pages change under the new ownership? And the short answer is not much. The Gatehouse philosophy is to give publishers and editors the freedom to manage their papers, and they expect what you expect, and that is that we uphold high standards of journalism, reflect the local community, and be a good citizen. Rest assured that we will continue to do the good work that you expect from us. We'll do everything from making sure that you know about the next food truck rodeo at the Columbus Commons to keeping an eye on public officials who are elected by you and paid by you and make policy and spend your tax dollars. And that includes the big stories such as the series that we ran last year on college campus crime, for which we just won another national award, or the series that we did on home health aides, and another on the woeful oversight of guardians for Ohio's most vulnerable citizens, both of which also won awards. And you should know that the reporter who went to Orlando to pick up the award that we won for the Campus Crime Series told me that reporters and editors from across the country came by to compliment him on the fine work that's being done routinely by your newspaper. That's the reputation that we seek to uphold, not for the awards, but because it's what you've told us you expect from us. Thanks.
Thank you both for those comments and for the candid nature of those comments. Jim, I'll start with you. In announcing the cuts last week, you said that they were necessary to ensure that the Dispatch thrives in the current newspaper media marketplace. Could you define thrive now in the newspaper business?
Sure. I don't think it's any secret that the print business has been profoundly affected by technology and changes in consumer behavior. And increasingly, consumers want to read their news on their telephone or by a Twitter feed or something of that nature. We need to adapt to that. The nature of the advertising business, and advertising represents about half the revenue that comes in the house, is also changing, and those changes are driven, again, largely by technology and changes in consumer behavior. So as the print business has gotten smaller over time, we've ramped up the digital business. and it will continue to grow. In fact, we're just planning to introduce what will be a terrific digital advertising agency to the Columbus market. But in the transition from print to digital, the industry overall, and true at the Dispatch, has seen some decline in revenues. And if we don't keep costs consistent with revenues such that we can maintain a sustainable business, we'll go away. And that's not to anybody's interest. So maintaining a healthy and profitable business is the key to keeping the Dispatch in the community and serving the community as it has.
What's an acceptable profit margin for a corporate newspaper chain?
It's all over the lot. I've seen newspapers that make 5%, and I've seen newspapers that make 25% of revenues.
Alan, you mentioned you've worked for the Wolf family for 31 years, I believe. You worked for this company for 3 months? Mm-hmm. You mentioned the changes in your job duties. How is it working for this company? How is it different than working for your old company?
In a lot of ways, it's the same because we have a lot of freedom to pursue stories as journalists would see to pursue stories. I mean, it's this company has a focus on good journalism, which is also what the Wolf family sought from us. So, in that sense, it's virtually the same.
You have I think, president or of the APME, the Associated Press Media Editors Association?
Correct.
What have your colleagues, because you're not the first newspaper to go through this. This Dispatch is one of the last newspapers to go through this. What have they told you about a change in ownership from family-based or a small company to a large company? What were the words of advice they gave you?
A lot of, I know very few of them have gone through the kind of change that we've gone through because very few papers have been family-owned in the past generation, really. I mean, there are horror stories out there about any such change, and I can honestly say that I have not experienced that.
Mm-hmm. Jim, you mentioned that a big cost driver of newspapers is payroll, obviously. You have to staff a newsroom, you have to staff circulation, other departments. You have to have the boots on the ground to gather the news. The other expense is paper. For how long will the Dispatch be a 7-day-a-week printed publication?
For as long as the business is viable. I don't see that changing for a decade more. You know, the family that owns the newspaper in Cleveland, for example, has cut back publication to 3 days a week, and they have a small street sales edition on those other days, and as a way to sustain the business in an environment of declining revenues. We don't have to do that here. This newspaper will be a healthy 7-day newspaper.
Mm-hmm. Delivery too, 7 days? Delivery, home delivery for 7 days as well?
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Okay. Alan, you mentioned the copy desks is moving to Texas eventually, and
Not all of it, but
well, that's what I want to get to, because the copy editor is someone who is your, sort of one of your last fact checkers, watches for grammar mistakes, watches for, errors in fact, and you could say there's an advantage to having that person in the newsroom, a part of the community. Will there be problems when those folks are in Texas?
could be. I mean, there could be problems here. So I don't see that as a big factor that they'll be in another city. Would I prefer to have them here? Sure. But the economies of scale that can be leveraged from the operation in Austin will allow us to reduce costs here and focus on the core mission. And to your point, the 9 copy editors who remain here will be focused on the stories that are produced here. The work done by the others in Austin will focus primarily on the wire stories and the content that comes from syndicates, which could be handled by others.
I know in radio, when they outsourced a lot of news and traffic, we kept hearing the traffic was backed up on 70 to Petaskalka. So that's why you need a local copy editor who knows it's Andy Ginther and not Adam Ginther or something like that.
Exactly.
Over the course of the past few months, Alan, you mentioned there's only been one reporter who's leaving as a result of this through a voluntary severance buyout. Were there other reporters that left that you didn't fill their positions? Is your newsroom smaller than it was when the Wolves owned it in June?
There are some who left before the sale that we have not replaced. Some other positions that have opened, we've been able to move people with multiple skills from other departments to fill positions that had been open.
Jim, the magazines, Capital Style is no longer in publication. What will happen to the wide range of magazines? Columbus Monthly, Columbus CEO, Columbus Alive, Columbus Bride, Columbus Parent. You have a whole bunch of magazines. What happens to those?
Those titles will all stay intact. Ray is working with his new team to reconfigure Columbus Monthly, but we will continue to publish Alive, Parent, Bride, and CEO.
Print editions?
Yes,
Are they profitable, those magazines?
you bet.
I sense some disbelief. How about the number of weeklies? I forget the number you said, 25 or so
25,
weeklies? That seems to be an area where there might be some consolidation. Do we need 25 different
Well, yeah,
weeklies for this
because there are
community?
25, they serve 25 different communities, and these are very local newspapers. So the paper that we deliver in Upper Arlington is a totally different paper than we deliver in Pataskala. So yeah, they serve the local business community and the interests of those communities.
We'll get to the editorial page in a moment, but let's start first with the involvement in the community. Whether or not you agreed with the Wolves' political stances or even some of their business decisions, you couldn't question their commitment to the community. They owned the newspaper for 100 years. They were very civically involved, business-wise, charity-wise. How can a company that owns 400 publications and 125 or so dailies, how can they be as involved in the local community?
Well, there's two pieces to that involvement. One was that the Wolves have been extraordinarily generous and were a wonderful philanthropic force in this community. I don't think you can anticipate Gatehouse being nearly that generous. On the other hand, the engagement with the community and being a citizen and a contributing part of this community as a company, in addition to the journalistic product, is important to Gatehouse. It's an important part of the business model. So there will be no retreat from the engagement with the community.
One of the ways the newspaper engages with the community is the editorial page. Some people agree, people don't. The Wolves have always been known as having a very, when they published it, a conservative newspaper. I saw an editorial about, I don't know, maybe 3 weeks ago that was really critical of John Kasich for his stance on public employee retirement systems. I don't think, maybe I'm alone, but I don't think we would have seen that before June. Will we see a different tack on the editorials publication? Will they be more moderate, less conservative?
I'd say you might see a little moderation. You probably have if you're a student of the editorial page, as the editorial that you just mentioned would illustrate. And I think probably the most visible sign of that would be in the editorial cartoons.
Do you have any examples? The one example I saw was after John Kasich gave his presidential announcement, and they had him meandering around the stage. It's typical of John Kasich. We're all used to it, but then he finally got to, yeah, I'm running for president.
The unscripted Ohio.
Yes. Which was perfect. It was a perfect illustration of the speech.
Yeah. And that's why it worked. I mean, it's what anybody who saw it might have thought at one point or another during the announcement, and I think Mr. Kasich even acknowledged after the fact. So, I mean, it was fair game. It was well done. I think it's perfectly appropriate.
Mm-hmm. Getting to the big picture journalism, aside from the day-to-day dispatch operations, but as broadcasters, we've dealt with this forever, especially on radio and even now with cable TV news, that we don't really have a deadline. We always have a deadline. For us in radio, it's the next hour. Cable TV news, it's now. As newspapers reporters, you've had the luxury of, way back, of having a couple different deadlines, usually late into the evening, where you could cover a story fully, let the facts come out, let the dust settle. But now in the digital world, you face the same issues that broadcasters have faced forever. Publish now.
Look at it as an opportunity.
Yeah. Yes, but with that comes risk of mistakes or publishing things that aren't correct at the time or not have the same depth. Do you worry about that as an editor?
Keeps me awake at night, of course. But we have really talented people. They know the risks, they know the challenges, and they know the standards that we need to hit. Do we make mistakes? Sure. Do we correct them as quickly as possible? Everybody knows the stakes are higher because we have to move faster, not just to compete with you and others of the electronic brethren, but because it's what you expect. I mean, in this Twitter, Facebook world, there's an instant expectation that we have a complete story online. And I'm not exaggerating. I mean, I've seen the comments on stories. Our goal in breaking news, first of all, is to own breaking news. That's my goal. We're going to own breaking news. And I've seen this time and again where we'll post a sentence or two just to say something is happening, and immediately readers will pounce on it and say, "Where's the rest of the story?" Well, the crash just happened 3 minutes ago. We're working on it, okay? But again, this is one of those both frustrations and opportunities. I appreciate immensely that people want to know that quickly. I just hope they're patient long enough for us to make sure that we have the facts right, because the number one rule in our newsroom is that we need to be right. So I would rather be second and right than first and wrong.
How does that change how your newsroom operates? Is it been an adjustment, especially for some of the older folks who've been around for a while, used to the newspaper deadlines?
It's a change, not recently, because we've been doing this for quite a while, and maybe counterintuitive that some of the longest term veterans have been some of the first to embrace what we need to do to be relevant in the digital age. So they've been leaders in that regard, and it's been terrific to see that happen.
Jim, you mentioned 10 years, at least 10 years before the print starts to possibly go away. Let's look out 15, 20 years from now. What will, quote, newspaper journalism look like, do you think?
Well, I think the journalism should look a whole lot like it does today. I think the business model will evolve. I think technology will drive that evolution. But it doesn't change journalism, and it doesn't change the mission of the newspaper.
Does the newspaper lose the impact that it had as the leading source? In most communities, it is the newspaper, because they've made the investment, they have the reporters to lead the community in news gathering.
Yes.
Does it lessen that impact?
No, no, I don't think so. For example, our digital audience is significantly greater than our print audience. We have several 100,000 people read the print paper, several million people visit the website and the mobile site.
So paywalls are here to stay, I would assume.
We'll see.
All of the other gatehouse papers have paywalls, correct?
Yes, and as does the Dispatch.
Yes. So you can see a point where they might go away. Will advertising ever make up enough of the revenue to offer it for free?
Well, we're just getting started. Digital advertising now represents something greater than 10% of the advertising revenue. I see that number growing significantly over time.
Okay. We would like to open up to questions. It is the CMC's tradition to allow the audience to ask questions of our guest. We ask you to be brief and concise and not make speeches when you ask your question. And a reminder, you are on television, so If you're running from the law, or if you have salad in your teeth, or someplace in between, you've been warned. Alan, what kind of reporter, I mean, you're the boss now. What kind of reporter do you hire now? I always say I no longer will hire a radio reporter. I will hire a multimedia reporter who can do radio. Does the same hold true in a quote, newspaper newsroom?
To a certain degree. I mean, we want people who can do it all. The expectation is that reporters today can certainly write stories, but also produce video and turn around a story in an instant, and also be savvy at social media. So the fundamentals of journalism are still the guiding force, but you have to be able to do it all.
One more question on that line, then we'll get to the audience. The pressure between devoting a staff to investigative, long-form journalism and feeding the beast, that balance is very hard to maintain. Mm-hmm. What is your plan under the new ownership to try to strike that balance?
Well, we plan to continue the in-depth enterprise reporting that we've been known for, and it's certainly a management challenge because we do have a daily newspaper to fill and a website to feed, but we have an extremely talented staff that is able to balance both.
Okay. Go ahead, please.
Well, thank you very much for being here. I'm curious, I'm Jane Scott, I'm curious about I love things like the smaller format that the Dispatch went to a few years ago. And when we travel, I'm very frustrated that I've got a newspaper that's like out to here and I don't know how to handle it anymore. What other things like that might other papers in the system, in your ownership system, might learn from the Dispatch that maybe those of us locally have been taking for granted?
Well, I can't speak to format, but when it comes to the journalism, we have a number of initiatives with Gatehouse, some of which Jim mentioned already, but I have a couple of reporters who are going to be doing some training for the chain so that newspaper editors and reporters across the enterprise will be able to learn from reporters at the Dispatch who are doing the high-level work that I was just talking about.
Yeah, and I'll say that the Dispatch is a very good organization, and its business practices in many respects are good examples for other newspapers and Gatehouse. I've been associated with Gatehouse just long enough to know that it's a very collaborative company, and there's a great deal of idea sharing and people sharing and that sort of thing, and we can learn a lot from what other newspapers in the organization are doing, and the others can learn a lot from the Dispatch.
Carol.
I'm Carol Looper. I know that a lot of people say they look to the Columbus Dispatch to see who the Dispatch endorses in elections, and that's who they will vote for. There are other people who say they look to the Dispatch to see who they endorse, and that's who they will vote against. Talk about your policy for endorsements, how you choose the candidates, how has that been, and how might that change?
Well, at this point, the process is the same. We invite candidates who are running for office to come in for an editorial board meeting. We listen to what they have to say, and in response to our questions, and also at their record of performance, either in political life or business. And as an editorial board, we make a decision. So that's what you can expect going forward.
What role does the publisher play in the endorsement of candidates at Gatehouse?
I can't tell you that. And it's not because I don't want to tell you, it's just because I have not been at a Gatehouse paper going into an election cycle. Mm-hmm. But my assumption is the publisher will play the same, well, will be a member of the editorial board, but just a member of the editorial board.
Okay. Professor?
My name is Paul Beck. I have a question about, well, you've answered and addressed most of my questions, but the question that I have as an avid reader of newspapers is that I've noticed that at the Dispatch over the years, there's been a disjuncture between the reporting, the headlines of the stories that are reported, and certainly between the two of them in the editorial page. Do you see that as changing, over time, where will the headlines be written, for example? Will they be in-house here with the Dispatch, or will they be outsourced to Austin?
To the headline question, some will be written here and some will be written in Austin. So I'm sorry to hear you say that there's a disconnect at times between the headline and the story. That's not our goal. The headline should reflect the essence of the story. I'm not saying we get it right every time, but we work hard at that, given the constraints that are faced by editors who are trying to fill a hole. We have less constraint on the website, and I was telling my lunch mate here that we purposely rewrite headlines for print or online, depending on where it appears first, because we have that ability to provide more information in the headlines online. To the editorial page question, I mean, there's a divide between the editorial page and the staff and the newsroom staff. At this point, I'm the only connection between the two, and we do that purposely because we don't want a connection between what the newsroom is doing and what the editorial page is doing.
Sir.
John Hartman. Most of the journalism in the Dispatch is pretty good, but you have the same problem that a lot of news organizations have. You have trouble covering yourselves fairly and accurately. The article that appeared in the paper last week announcing the changes in the Dispatch was a one-sided press release with one source. It wouldn't have made it past a beginning journalism reporting class. If you can't cover yourself fully and fairly, then would you consider hiring an independent reporter to cover the changes at the Dispatch? Thank you.
Interesting question.
Yeah, the answer to your question is no.
Well, Al, let me ask you, it has to be tough, as a journalist who's gone through ownership changes in my career, it has to be tough because it is news that the Dispatch was sold. How do you cover yourself? What kind of thought process goes into it? I mean, one decision is you don't cover yourself because it's a true conflict of interest, and you don't cover yourselves. But on the other hand, you want to let your readers know what's going on. How do you manage that?
I think we're obligated to tell people what we're doing and how we do it, and that's why I read a column every Sunday, and Ben Marison did the same before me, to tell readers what's going on. Ben told me before I started doing this that if you're not flogging yourself, you're doing too much bragging. So it's hard to win in that. And I understand the point about hiring somebody to report objectively on what we do, but it's not going to happen.
And there are other outlets in town who do report. You know,
Yeah,
we've
right.
reported a little.
Absolutely.
Business First has done quite a bit of reporting. So.
Sure.
One quick question: are you still going to do the home handyman column?
Yes.
That's what's most important to me.
Yes.
All
Yes.
right. Great. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Sandra Piskarczyk with the City of Dublin. In our most recent community survey, which was conducted less than 3 years ago, the local paper, the Dublin Villager, is still the #1 preferred source of news for Dublin residents. So I'm just wondering what the business plan is. You talk about having 25 local papers. Will we all survive together?
Sure. Yes. Those 25 papers are all targeted at their individual communities and serve the business communities of each of those 25. They're doing fine, and the business is thriving. We've got a very capable manager running that business, and there's no reason to expect that they won't keep going.
New media, the majority of their publications are weeklies. And does that show you that there's more profit in the weeklies than even the dailies? I know you're growing the dailies now, but
Yeah, not necessarily, no.
just the way it's worked out.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Alexis Ferrone. My question kind of takes us back to niche products for a moment. The Alive does a lot of wonderful things for our city in talking about our arts and culture, which is a vested interest we all have in this room about moving Columbus forward. What do you see as the future of the Alive, and do you think you're going to change paper, take it glossy, increase staff? What are your thoughts on that? Thank you.
See Ray sweating down there. That's a question that will land on Ray Peprocki's desk, Alive is part of the magazine division, and Ray's first priority is Columbus Monthly, but Alive is on deck.
We have time for one more question. Go ahead, sir.
Yes, my name is John McKnight, and my question doesn't go so much to the change of ownership of the Dispatch, but Carol Looper's question made me think of this. Why is it that the Dispatch, or any newspaper for that matter, feel the need to endorse a specific candidate? It almost seems like that sort of goes against, free press, free journalism. I don't know. It seems like you should possibly, might serve the public better by just putting information out there of all the candidates, and of course factual information. Why does the paper have to endorse a particular candidate? I don't say that because you endorse a candidate I don't like or anything. I don't know. It just seems like it feels like losing my words here. It seems biased to do that. So why does the Dispatch or any paper feel the need to do that? Why can't you just, not take a stance, just put information
It's a
out there?
long-standing tradition that newspapers do this. Some have stopped. We see it as an important role that the newspaper plays in the community to at least begin the conversation about important topics. That's one of the main functions of editorials, to take a position as an editorial board, not as a newsroom, and put that out there for the community to discuss. And we expect voters to make their own decisions. But we also know that many readers don't have the opportunity to read every word every day. And so those of us who are following the news closely and have the opportunity to meet with candidates or really delve deep into the issues that we're all faced at the ballot box, have an opportunity, if not an obligation, to say, here's how this all stacks up in our view. You may not like it, but we call them as we see them, and I think it's important for all readers to understand that strong line between newsroom and editorial page editor and staff is very strong.
Jim, one last question from me. You mentioned you'll be here another month. That means there's another publisher coming on board. Do you know who that person is? Can you give us a clue? Is it a...
No, yes, I do, and no, I won't.
Does the person have to move far? Do they have to relocate?
Depends what the meaning of far is.
Inside the outer belt or outside? I'm trying. All right. Thank you very much. Alan Miller, Jim Hopson, thank you very much.
All right, thank you, everybody. I hope everybody here learned something. I know I did in today's forum. Remember that you can view and share all of our forums on CTV, Columbus Television, on WOSU and PBS affiliates statewide through the Ohio channel, and anytime on CMC's website via YouTube. Let's thank our speakers, Jim Hopson, Alan Miller, and Mike Thompson. And thanks to all of you for being here. We'll see you again at CMC soon.